got this castle that his father built, that the wonderful show we all love, Game of Thrones, has used it quite often to shoot the series up there at Gosford Castle. In the upper reaches of Ireland. Your closest city would be Belfast. He was engaged in this huge effort to build this monstrous castle with turrets and a moat and, oh my gosh, 40, room castle with, acres and acres of grounds. But within the castle was this library with towering ceilings, and Gosford set about, the son, the third Earl of Gosford, to fill this library, make it the most magnificent private library in Ireland. So interestingly enough, in 1836, he lugged home not a two-volume Gutenberg, but a one-volume Gutenberg, which is our book that we wrote our book about, number 45. So this was 1836. It was wrapped in old newspaper and string. And I love this detail. He didn't consider it the most important or the most valuable book in his library. He just treated it like any other old, random, rare book he was adding to his collection. And he put it at the top of his shelf where it was untouched and unreachable. And there it sat pretty much from 1836 to 1884. And I attribute that sort of neglect to a very lucky thing, because the Bible wasn't handled, it wasn't touched, it wasn't used in a daily religious practice. It was preserved. It wasn't open and shut. It wasn't subjected to the elements or the weather. And what I love about our wonderful Earl Gosford is he coveted his Shakespeare folio. The Shakespeare folio he would touch, handle, read, show off to friends, carry it around. He considered it a much more valuable book. So he did not, in 1836, when he brought it home, consider the Gutenberg Bible this mighty rarity, the greatest book on earth, that dealers and book collectors and bibliophiles were all fighting over to own. And he was not only a great book collector, but he was what we call a point maniac. So he was always looking for printing errors and little details in his book, and would keep meticulous notes on one edition of a book versus another edition, and slight changes or modifications in the printing. So I think, in a sense, the Gutenberg Bible just didn't appeal to him as a point maniac. But nevertheless, he had the shrewd wisdom to buy the book and hide it at Gosford Castle.
That's interesting that it managed to be preserved in his care, because when I think of a book that lasts for 500 years, most of those centuries it's exposed to the elements, it astounds me that it survives, because if you go to a garage sale, you'll see cardboard boxes full of Harlequin novels from the 1960s with yellow stained pages, and thinking that a book could survive like that. From what you know, do other copies of the Gutenberg Bible get destroyed from use, or are there others that are in as good of condition as 45 as you've seen?
I can honestly say that this is perhaps one of the prettiest of the Gutenberg Bibles and one of the best preserved. It also has a weird anomaly, which is, to my knowledge, and I hope if anyone's listening and know of any Gutenberg Bible without this feature, I'd love to hear about it. But from my research, I've pretty much determined that this Gutenberg Bible is the only one with these funny little vellum chapter markers that marked different chapters in the Bible, different books of the Bible, I should say. And they were like sort of ugly little ancient vellum skin tags, sort of a primitive chapter indexing system. So it's kind of fun. But it is one of the few Bibles, Gutenberg Bibles, that we're aware of in the world today, of the 48 confirmed existing Gutenberg Bibles, that is in its original binding, which makes it very rare and very special. One of the intriguing things I learned about Gutenberg's Bibles was the paper came from a place in Piedmont, Italy, and of course, scholars have, studied this quite extensively on the paper making process. They could actually trace the paper to one paper mill facility in Piedmont, Italy. And it was made from rags, cloth rags. And that's why the parchment is so sturdy and is so strong. And at one moment in this story, one of the owners is terrified over how to keep the book carefully preserved. And she is instructed that not to worry, that the parchment that the Gutenberg Bible is printed on will last 1,000 years, whereas the Daniel Steele novel you just mentioned or other pulp novels will disintegrate within 50 years. So in that sense, it's kind of remarkable that perhaps the greatest book in the world will last another 1,000 years without worrying too much about it from the elements, where our average, everyday, random paperback will corrode, the paper will start to disintegrate, the ink will disintegrate further and won't last anywhere near the Gutenberg. So it's kind of a fun statistic.
That makes me happy that future archaeologists won't find any James Patterson books in the garbage dumps of the 21st century. It's sort of like, we get a do-over for future historians. We're going to look much better in posterity than we actually were.
It's almost like a self-generating destroyal process, right?
Right. Well, unfortunately, digital's forever, so they'll have Twitter and Instagram. So
that's right. The digital is forever. Oh, my gosh. But Lord Gosford is such a character, and of course, he's always competing with, because he's in Ireland and he feels like an outcast, he uses his book collection as a way to generate status for himself, and he's always competing with his father. Of course, his interest is not in building this enormous castle. Well, when the father dies, of course, the whole colossal folly of building this giant castle lands on poor Gosford's shoulders. And for a while, he has to completely stop buying books because there's no money. It's all going into, paying off his father's debts and trying to finish this enormous castle. Finally, poor Gosford, I think, pretty much drops dead from exhaustion in 1864. And then, of course, the book takes on its next journey.
Hey, everyone, Scott here. We're going to take a very short break for a word from our sponsors. Yeah, I'm interested in these next few owners. It seems like it passes from tycoon or heiress tycoon to another person. They get wealthy or they completely blow their fortune or their child does, and then it goes to the next person. So these stories get really interesting. Who's the next owner of number 45?
The next owner buys the book in 1884, and his name is Lord William Amherst. And Scott, this is so crazy. His lifestyle, no joke, exceeds even the grandeur of Downton Abbey. He had this beautiful, sprawling home, dozens of bedrooms, including a bedroom for royalty. They had a falconer's hut. He had koi ponds. He had a museum for his Egyptian antiquities. Acres of gardens, a huge staff, early electric lighting, really one of the first in the UK, I understand. And he led this really remarkable, very gilded existence. Basically, from inheriting from his family, and then also he was quite a land baron, very, very successful. But he was not only a great bibliophile, but he was also interested in Egyptian antiquities. And in fact, in another neat twist in the story, he was the one that assisted the man who discovered King Tut's tomb, Mr. Carter, we all know that story, in getting his first job with the British Museum. So he had a beautiful yacht called the Cassiana. He traveled to the Middle East quite a bit. He and his family collected Saluki dogs, which was kind of a neat, fun story. And he was blessed with 6 daughters. So he had a loving, very bright, very intellectual wife and 6 daughters who were all readers, highly educated, and loved nothing more than joining their father in the family library at the beautiful Amherst home.
He was a sugar baron, is that right?
The family made their original fortune from both sugar and, sadly, human trafficking in slaves. But by the time Lord Amherst took over, it was mainly a financial estate based on land rents. But it was a staggering amount of money. I detail it in the book a little bit about the money income that he was able to produce annually to not only support 6 beautiful, smart girls, but to support this lavish lifestyle. The home was called Didlington Hall, and sadly, it was torn down. But there are incredible pictures. You can go online and just Google Didlington Hall, and you will see truly a lifestyle of the bygone era that, those who I certainly watched every episode of Downton Abbey and enjoyed it very much. And if you had to pick sort of a popular story we're all familiar with, I would describe that Amherst's lifestyle actually exceeded Downton Abbey. It's so neat. It's just really a fun story. But sadly, it all came crashing down, and the Gutenberg plays a role in this. And it's one of the reasons I just love the true stories, is they take you in such surprising directions. After really just a lavish, opulent lifestyle where a man could buy any piece of art he wanted, he even bought the giant Egyptian statues to flank the front doors of Didlington Hall. And Scott, these statues today are in in New York City in the big museum. They're called the Sekhmet statues, and they're these sort of like griffin-like female-breasted statues. I think they weigh 10 tons. So I don't know how on earth he transported them all the way to Didlington Hall outside London, but he did. Anyway, to take us to the end of the story, sadly, in his 50s, almost approaching 60, Lord Amherst discovered that his solicitor, a man by the name of Cheston, committed suicide, and the family was horribly shocked by this. But then the worst news came to the family, which was the solicitor for 15 years or so had embezzled all of Amherst's money through a very elaborate stock scheme. It's kind of too complicated to go into here, but trust me to say, Cheston had pretty much wiped out the Amherst fortune. So Amherst was forced to immediately sell his book collection, to pay off debts, to save the honor of the family, and he was forced to sell his Gutenberg Bible.
So at this point, the Bible is changing hands more frequently, and in the Victorian and then the Edwardian era, it sounds like owning this Bible, does it become purely a status symbol in a way that it wasn't in earlier centuries?
Without question, it became like a hope diamond. It became like a mini Mona Lisa, considered quickly gaining in value, considered, quote, a priceless artifact of Western civilization. It would be rare when the auctions would happen for the sale of a Gutenberg Bible, but when they did, the rooms were packed. Book dealers from all around the world would descend in droves. So by the time Amherst bought his copy of the Gutenberg Bible, number 45, it was already a very coveted book, very desired by dealers, collectors, and of course bibliophiles. And at this point, private ownership was pretty much closing. Only a great museum or a great library or the wealthiest individual could even hope to own one. So I would peg William Amherst as representing sort of the end of this private ownership era. Unless you are exceedingly wealthy and one of the richest men in the world, you couldn't have a Gutenberg for yourself, for your library, a Gutenberg of your own.
Right. And then the next owner, What I love is if I was trying to imagine who would buy something very expensive for the purpose of status, a sauce baron is just about the perfect profile. And that makes him sound a little bit cruder than he is. So he is, what's his name? The owner of the Worcestershire sauce empire.
Yes, Dyson